Happy Saturday! Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Pink Plus podcast. I'm your host, Savannah Burns, and today we're talking to Kelly Travis. Kelly is a health and success coach who battled an eating disorder at a young age that turned her life upside down. Today, she's here to discuss the importance of mental health and why having tough discussions is a must when dealing with depression. Please welcome Kelly.
Hello, I'm Kelly Travis. I am a health and career coach. I work primarily with women in the career space while also helping them to manage their health. So emotional, mental, and physical health are key foundational pieces to everything that we do in our life. And for me, I've learned through experience that without that, we can't truly be our best. So that's the work that I do. In addition, I am an Enneagram certified practitioner. The Enneagram is a wonderful tool in my coaching business. I'm sure we'll get into that. And a little bit about me, as you asked, Savannah. Well, if we start like way back, and I want to bring this up just because of our topic today, I am a recovered anorexic. I spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital on the psych ward when I was 20. I had to drop out of school. I was a competitive athlete and had to throw it kind of all away to make sure that I took care of myself. And it was a really scary period of time in my life. Back then, the way that they handled eating disorders was they just made sure you got back to the weight you were supposed to. And I really didn't fully recover until about 10 years later when I became pregnant with my first son. So even though I looked healthier, I was still really struggling with depression, a lot of issues around my weight, and hadn't really fleshed that out and recovered until much later. And speaking of my son, I have 2 kids. I'm a single mom. I have 2 young children, 7 and 8. And I'm still a runner, but a healthy one now.
So I am sorry to hear that you battled anorexia. The last few episodes I've done, I think we've kind of touched on eating disorders and different variants of it. But if you don't mind me asking, of course, you don't have to go into details. Was the anorexia something that just kind of came about sporadically? Did it stem from like childhood trauma? Was it from being an athlete, like you mentioned?
Yeah, it was a mix of things, like a very lethal cocktail. I grew up in a household, in a family where of women with severe body image issues, dieters, spoke very negatively about their bodies, and had their own eating disorders, but was not like diagnosed. So then when I went off to school, I had a really horrible coach. Mentors, people in our lives can swing us one way or the other. And he, like a lot of coaches at the time, and we hear about it now too, wanted us to be the smallest we could because he thought the smaller we were, the faster we'd be. So he would come up behind me, grab the back of my arm, tell me I had some fat back there. I mean, it was rough. But because I had grown up in the environment where I constantly heard women shaming their bodies, it really didn't click for me that that was not okay. He wrote me a contract to lose weight, not allowed. And I kept it secret. And then what happened in response to your question is I'm such an achiever that I took it really far. And then it became this numbing coping mechanism. I was severely depressed, and then finally to the point where my kidneys were failing, the lining around my heart was thinning, so many things were just not going well. And then that's when, I went into treatment.
So I really admire you talking about the women in your life having an influence on your eating disorder because of the way that they negatively spoke about themselves. And I feel like that's something within the last few years that we're starting to kind of really put together.
Yeah.
Is how big of an impact the words that we say about ourselves have on our children.
Yes.
I feel like that happens a lot more with little girls, but you're also a mom to boys. Do you feel like that could also negatively impact boys as well?
I think so. I'll be honest with you. The first thought I had when I found out I was pregnant the first time was, I hope it's not a girl. I was so terrified that I was going to do what the family members in my life did. And, I learned that I can change that narrative, and I did. Mm-hmm. But I do think that boys pick up on that in the same way girls do. So I'm very careful. I never say anything about my body. If they ask questions about stuff like that, because they hear it from other kids, right? Then we talk about it and we, make sure we flesh that out. But it is a challenge. And I have friends who have little girls, and they have to be extra careful because those girls are picking it up at school. So it's, reinforced on all these ways. So we have to be super careful.
Yeah, definitely. So you talked about being an Enneagram practitioner.
Yes.
I still am not confident in the way that I say that.
You did it. You're good. You're good.
Can you go into that a little bit, how you use that for work?
Yes. I fell in love with this personality assessment a handful of years ago because it's unlike other assessments that typically put you in a box, right? This one it's very multifaceted. So if you and I were the same type, there's so many other parts of this assessment that show that we're actually nothing alike. And so what I love about it is we learn how we behave, but then we also learn why we behave. What are our core motivations? Where is it coming from? As an example, I'm what you would call a type 2. It's called the helper. My core motivation is to help people. I place a lot of value in being available to others. I find validation in that, which I have to be careful about, right? Mm-hmm. And then, so we learn about that, our blind spots and that dark side of things too, right? So I have to be extra, I have to work extra hard to set boundaries, to say no, to take care of myself, because I can very much fall into that, but I need to put everybody else first.
Yes.
And so it also teaches a lot about how we show up when we're under stress and not taking care of ourselves, and how we show up when we're taking care of ourselves and what that looks like. So it's not a tool to change us. It's a tool to help us transform into being even better.
But understand ourselves.
Exactly. It's amazing. That. Yeah, I love it.
And it sounds like an assessment that you could not only use just for setting yourself up for success or for work or stuff, but I kind of want to know even the differences between my partner and I.
I use it with partners in relationship. I use it in companies with their teams so that they can learn the dynamic, how they should work together, what their weaknesses are. And then just one-on-one to help with goal setting, to know how to approach things. Some people are risk takers, some people aren't. Understanding all of those things that are important in moving forward and becoming a better version of ourselves.
How did you find this assessment? What got you interested in this?
I think I learned so my background is mental health. I went to school after I got out of the hospital, committed to doing something. I spent time studying addiction and went down that route for a very long time. So I've always been really keyed into a lot of these things that help with mental health. And that's how I found it.
Okay. What does it take to become a practitioner?
I had to go through a pretty intensive 2-week training, and then you have to do a whole what do you call it? A case study. So there's a lot that goes into it to be able to do it.
So what brought your interest into health coaching? How did you get to that point?
Well, it has a lot to do with my background. I, like many people, have taken, an up and down journey in my career. It has not been just one linear line. So like I said, I studied mental health and public health after I got out of the hospital and went back to school. spent time in that space in social work and in working with at-risk people. And then I moved here to Vegas, and I was young and I was nervous about working in that space in Vegas. So I ended up completely shifting gears and getting into the publishing space. And so I spent about 10 years in publishing and kind of wound my way up through the ranks within that space. And then when I had my first son, I was like, you know what? It's time for me to circle back and do the thing that really changed my life at the beginning and that I committed to really being active in. And so I went back and got additional certifications to do this work. Yeah.
What's something you wish you had known before you started coaching?
I think that the biggest challenge for me, and I think I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't gotten into it, is that there's a lot of people doing this work that have zero credentials, and it muddies the space a lot. So it makes it hard to separate yourself from that. I mean, I can tell you all the certifications I have and my background, but a lot of people don't look at that. And so there's been a lot of damage done within the space to folks who trust in, someone who is not qualified.
So if you're somebody who's struggling with mental health, what are some legit resources?
Well, I would definitely, I'm a big believer in therapy. So
okay.
I would say number one, therapy. I go to a therapist every other week. And that, foundationally is good, but there's so many different types of therapy, right? Some people might say like talk therapy is not for me. There's so much out there now between, like people will do hypnosis, or they'll do, now they're doing a lot of experimentation with ketamine and some of these other things. Mm-hmm. I've done, what's it called? There's a therapy that really helps with trauma, like PTSD. So all kinds of stuff. And I think starting there is really important. Just as like a check-in, see where you're at. Lots of therapists do kind of an overall surveying of how you're doing, right? Before they can even diagnose, right? So they do kind of an evaluation. And then I think that, if you can afford it, if you have the time, coaching is great with somebody who knows what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So you have to be really picky and vet people and, really kind of do your research and make sure you're comfortable with that person. Because it's a great addition if you can do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you actually have a podcast of your own. I was checking out a few days ago, and one of your episodes was called Navigating and Understanding Depression.
Yeah.
And that's something that we are big talkers about here at the Peak Plus podcast. So I wanted to go over that with you today.
Love it.
What are some of the symptoms that are typically like exhibited in depression? Like how can you tell the difference between somebody having a hard couple of days and this is actual diagnosable depression?
Yeah. Well, let's start with saying I am not a doctor. I am not a therapist. So I just want to make sure, I say that. But I am somebody who struggles with depression still. I went through a really, I kind of have my waves of it, bouts of it. And the symptoms can vary depending on the person, right? It can be anything from loss of appetite to wanting to eat everything. It can be trouble sleeping to increased fatigue and wanting to be in bed all day, feeling worthless or shame or guilt. Definitely difficulty thinking, making decisions, just showing up and being productive. And a loss of interest in things that used to bring pleasure, right? I think that, as an example, I am a competitive runner. Running has always been this thing for me that brings me joy. It's a stress reliever. But when it starts to feel hard and I don't want to do it, I know that I'm in a place that maybe I should, pay attention to. Feeling sad, like low mood, right? And then, the extreme, which, is a real big red flag, is thoughts of death or suicide, right? Which,
yes.
Getting help for that is really important.
So I think when people typically think about like the stereotypical depression, they think crying all the time, being sad, feeling like you're in a funk. I think something that people don't really realize as part of being depression is irritability and rage.
Yes.
And I feel like people just kind of glaze over that part, thinking like, oh, I'm in a bad mood, or, you know, it's just been a hard couple days, so I'm angry. And people don't realize that that's such a huge sign of depression, is just being angry or like snapping at people that we love, and that irritability that comes with it.
I love that you said that. And I think that what also happens, especially in our like Western culture, women, when they are struggling, is people are quick to go, well, you're just hormonal. What time of the month is it for you? No. Like if you're not feeling well, you know, like we all know our body, and tuning into it, which is something that in our society we have really failed at, right? Media, society, we've become so used to being told how we should feel, how we should think, what, you know, all of this, that people are just operating on autopilot, not paying attention to how they feel. It's scary, I know, to like slow down and ask yourself, what's going on with me right now? But so important, right? Because we can uncover some of those things, especially before it just gets to that point where you're really, really in a bad place.
Yeah. And I think just like you said, like society's kind of conditioned us into basically always believing that it's our own hormonal fault, that we sometimes brush off things that are actual legitimate reasons to be upset. Like if I get annoyed with my husband because of something, I have to sit there and be like, oh, it's probably just because I'm hormonal, and not because he's actually annoying me that day and he's being an a-hole, you know. It has to be me. There's no way it could be him because I'm hormonal.
Yeah.
So at what point is contacting a physician a good idea? Obviously when you're having thoughts of suicide or harming yourself, but after how long of suffering is it time to be like, okay, that's enough?
Yeah, I think if you've been struggling for at least 2 weeks, then, you know, and things are changing and how you're functioning and how you're feeling, and you're not seeing the light, it's definitely time to see somebody, have an evaluation, a conversation. And there's so many free resources or sliding scale type resources out these days that, you know, make it easier to just, like, the website Mental Health America has a free like evaluation that you can do right there. So definitely worth exploring.
So you said you were a big proponent of therapy, and then you're also a runner, which I think is probably kind of like an outlet for you. Do you like to take more of a holistic approach to depression, where you're just kind of out in nature, you need some sunshine, you need some diet and exercise, or are you also an advocate for medication?
Yeah, I think those two are different things, right? For me, I am an advocate for medication if that is right for you, right? And I think that sometimes we're in such a bad place that we have to start with that. And, you know, depending on your brain chemistry, right? Biochemistry, genetics play a huge factor in depression. It's not just like the environment and what's happening in your life. And so it can run in families. There can be chemicals in the brain that contribute to the symptoms. So that's when medication is really helpful. Antidepressants can be just prescribed. And then I think, you know, in terms of coping and like self-care, on top of that therapy, though, that's when you add in and make sure you're doing the regular exercise, you're eating well, you're getting out in the sun and nature, you're setting boundaries, like some of those things that help. You don't have to be on medication if, you know, if those things work, but I really believe in getting rid of that stigma about medication and, you know, it's okay. Like we've all been there, or, you know,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to circle back around to you saying, talking about the different chemical imbalances in the brain, because I've heard firsthand from people, and I've even said this to myself, like, I have no reason to be depressed. Everything's going well. I have a great job. I have a great kid. I have a great husband. I have a roof over my head. I have no reason to be depressed. And sometimes it has nothing to do with your environment, and it is all internal. So if you're somebody who's like, I'm really struggling, but it can't be depression because I have nothing to be sad about, that is absolutely a thought you have to get rid of.
Yeah. And I think, more and more people are talking about this whole toxic positivity thing, which we do to ourselves, right?
Yep.
Like, I should be more grateful for what I have, or it could be worse or whatever. That's the worst thing you can do to yourself when you're in that place. Yes, when you're like grumpy and you're just having a rough day, then okay, you can coach yourself a little bit. But when you're really struggling and it's depression, saying those things to yourself or hearing it from another person just makes it worse.
Yeah, and just because somebody else may have it worse does not mean that what you're going through is not tough.
No, we're all on our own journey, and we're all, dealing with life the best we can.
Yeah, exactly. So on those days when somebody just really lacks the energy to get out of bed, I know this has happened to me where it's not that I want to die, but if I were to go to sleep and not wake up, that would be okay too. When you don't have the motivation to get yourself out of bed in the morning, what is something that you think is the key to self-motivating, to getting ourselves out in the sunshine?
Yeah, I think it's baby steps. I can't put myself in other people's shoes. I just know what works for me. And when I'm struggling, like getting out the door, just being outside helps me a ton. Having a conversation with a loved one, writing, journaling, like something that helps us move through it. But I think that that's a personal thing, identifying what's going to help you when you're really, really having a hard time. And, maybe giving yourself a little bit of time to take it slow, but then figuring out how to move forward.
Yeah. I think having people that are in your support system, I think is a big thing too. Like if you can have an internal conversation with yourself and be able to figure out whether you respond better to tough love or someone who coddles you and tells you like, tomorrow's a new day, we're going to be okay. That kind of thing. Like, and I shouldn't even say coddles because that gives it like a negative connotation to it. But you know what I mean? Like if you're somebody who likes the warm fuzzies, or if you're somebody who needs some to be told, get your ass out of bed, go take a shower.
Yes.
You have responsibilities, that kind of thing. Being able to determine that and then tell your people in your support system, if you don't hear from me for a couple days, or if I haven't gotten out of bed in 2 days, this is what I need. I think that's a big conversation that people need to be having.
It's a hard conversation, which is why people don't have it, but it's so important because having that, I don't even want to, accountability is not the right word, but somebody who knows what you're going through doesn't mean that they understand it, but they know what's going on. You've committed to them that this is what you need in those moments, like you said, is huge. And make sure it's a safe person, right? Like I don't tell the whole world. Well, I guess I do sometimes, but but like nobody knows the intimate details of what I'm feeling other than like one human, and that human is helpful in me navigating. And usually, I just need to get on the phone and cry. Like, that's it. And then I feel better because tears are so cleansing. And if I just, do that, I feel so much better. Cold showers are also really huge for me. Because it just shifts your energy so fast.
It's a shock to the system.
Exactly. But yeah, like I said, I can't, say specifically what people can do, but I think getting help, no matter where you're at, is important.
So if you are a loved one or is in a support system and you have not had that conversation with somebody, and maybe you are not somebody who has experienced depression firsthand, because I think depression is one of those things that you don't really truly understand or really truly empathize with until you've gone through it. What is something that your loved ones can do to be supportive when they don't really know where to start?
I think it depends on the person, right? So if you're a personality that really shies away from any type of emotional feeling, talking, conversation, that's going to be, you're like only going to think logically. Whereas if you're somebody who is a more emotional, sensitive person, then like me, having that type of conversation will help. And then there's so much in between, right? Because we have our guard up. We're trying to protect ourselves. We're trying to put on this facade in a lot of ways. So if hopefully I answer this. If you are a loved one of somebody who you know is struggling, I know that it's scary to approach that because it can go one way or the other. They can go deeper away and hide, right? Or they can respond in like accepting that help. Only you know what that person is like. So if it's somebody who you know is not going to be responsive to, hey, I think you should get some help, or, I've noticed this or that, then I love providing resources to people like that, right? Like, hey, I read this article. Hey, I found out about this website. Did you know that these resources are available? Because somebody who thinks like that might read it, look at it, they won't feel as threatened. And then on the other side, if it is somebody who really is needing help and like asking for it, then offering like your ear, listening only, right? Doing those types of things. And again, helping them find the resources and the support, asking them if they've contacted a therapist. How is that going? Just, checking in on them.
Yeah. And I think a big thing to get across to people, if you are not somebody who has experienced it yourself, is when you're trying to be supportive, if it is not receptive.
Receptive.
If it's not received well, I'm like, what is that word? If it's not received well, you really cannot take it personally. No. Like I have a hard time with accountability of my irritability in depression. So if I'm really going through something and I'm just kind of venting and somebody's like, maybe you should get back on meds, I almost kind of take it personally. Like, why would you think that? Even though all the signs are there, it almost kind of like makes me upset that somebody automatically is like, oh, you're depressed.
Yeah.
So you really cannot take it personal, because when I'm not depressed, when I'm feeling great, then I'm like, that was not the right reaction to that.
Did not like that.
Right. So it seems like in our society now that depression isn't really viewed with the seriousness that like an actual broken bone or an injury has, even though depression can be just as debilitating. In your opinion, why are people with mental health issues easier to write off than those wearing like an obvious sign of injury or sickness?
I think exactly what you just said, right? I mean, we can see the broken bones, we can see the physical injuries, and we know what to do with that. It's just like a woman who's struggling with their hormones or unable to get pregnant or something like that. You can't see the physical symptoms, right? And so it's very easy to just brush it off because I don't see anything. It's fine.
Yeah.
But just like an athlete needs to take care of their physical body to be able to show up their best, we also need to take care of everything inside. Right. And I think that we're getting there culturally. I think that the pandemic really, like, it has moved us forward a bit in talking about mental health, because so many people are struggling and were struggling and have become more open about it and are normalizing it, and we're having more conversations around it. But I do think we have a long way to go.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
And it's sad that when it's somebody who shows up to work with a cast or something, it's like, oh my gosh, what can I do for you? Can I do your grocery shopping? Can I help you with this? Or, do you need help with this? Or we're always so willing to jump in when we can see the obvious signs. But then somebody will, take their own life, and it's like we're so sad after the fact, but we never bothered checking in before.
Well,
it's like somebody's not seeming like themselves, and it's like, oh, they're just having a bad day, but we're not having serious conversations. I think, just like you said, to get us to the point, we have a long way to go.
Yeah. And I think that, in those cases, it's really, we have to encourage, like you said, conversation, being open, sharing how we're doing, because nobody else around us is going to know, because you can't see it. Right. And that is the problem. Like, we hear about, people who are really struggling and you never would have known. And that's because we're too afraid to talk about it. Right.
Yeah.
And that's, again, why I think that, like, therapy, like, start there. So you at least have a safe space to have a conversation, and then move forward from there.
Yeah. And I think with depression, it's hard to know what is normal for depression. And we all have this like voice in the back of our head that's like, but maybe you're crazy. Maybe you're actually losing your mind. Maybe this isn't depression at all. So even if you talk to your therapist, you almost have a little bit of a hesitation. Like, is he going to want me committed? Like, are we borderline losing our mind right now? And that's a hard conversation to even have with yourself.
Yeah, it's scary because, our brains are super complex. And you add in, all the life experiences and what contributes to those things, and it makes it even more complicated.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think, aside from having these conversations, what can we do as society to get us to that point? Like, what are the steps? How do we get to where this is totally normal? There's no stigma to mental health anymore.
I think that's a really great question for a professional. I think, what I'm doing is I am very honest about my own challenges. I don't think that everyone needs to do that, though. But because of what I do and my own experiences, I feel like it's important for me to talk about it. But on a lower level, volunteering for every community has some sort of mental health nonprofit or something like that. Volunteering, providing resources, if you have the funds, donating, so that those professionals, those people that are doing the work in the communities can do more and affect more change. Because one of the biggest challenges, and in the statistics that are out now, is the minorities, the folks who are have less financially, that are in areas where there's poverty or any of those things, they are being hit even harder, and they don't have the resources to get the help. And so if we can make a dent in that space, then we'll see a big improvement too.
Did you battle your depression back when you were dealing with your eating disorder, or did that come after? You might have already mentioned.
Yeah, it was during. I had a pretty big bout of depression that came with all of that and lasted for quite a few years. And I relapsed, so that contributed. And then I came out of it for a while. And really, I haven't struggled with depression since, that period of time in my life. Probably when I was 30 was kind of the last bit of it. And then these last 2 years really hit me, being a mom with 2 little boys and home and not seeing people. I mean, we need people. So, a lot of us got comfortable. I got real comfortable being in my comfy pants and, not seeing people. But I'm a people person. Like, we need human connection. That's how we evolved. And I think it's a good reminder that we need hugs. We need to be able to see faces and smiles. And that goes a long way with our mental health. And, as an example, the kids finally they don't have to wear masks to school. And I am somebody who was all for it by the time they made that decision, because I want them to see mouths. And I had no idea what the impact of not being able to see people's faces had until the day I went to school to drop them off. And I saw all these people I've seen for years, and I saw their faces, and I was like, oh my God, I am so happy. This is amazing. So just that, I mean, we have to be able to be connected in whatever way. And I think pushing ourselves to be social and to be out and change our environment every once in a while can go a long way with our mental health.
It really makes me wonder what the impact of this is going to have on, I mean, you said your boys are 7 and 8. So going back 3 years, I mean, they were just little bitty guys. My son is 1.5 years and was born in the pandemic. And so going out in public with the mask and everything, it was sad that he was starting to get used to your facial expressions changing, only seeing half your face.
Yeah.
Like, he could tell even with a mask on me when I was smiling. And that really makes me wonder, like, these kids growing up now that are in that really vulnerable age, what kind of lasting impact that's going to have on them, where they're used to being kind of isolated and not seen.
Yeah.
Smiles or warmth on people's faces.
It is. Yeah. I mean, it's such a huge form of communication, right? It's like body language. So I definitely, like, my oldest was super nervous and full of anxiety the first day that they went back because, you know, they've been told for a couple of years that, like, you have to have it on to protect yourself. Mm-hmm. And so he just, you know, it was hard for him to be able to make that flip so quickly. So it'll be interesting. Like, are we going to have a bunch of kids that are constantly like washing their hands and like, maybe it'll be, who knows?
Yeah. And we tell the kids that this is for their safety and this is to protect them and this is to keep them from getting sick. Now, on the flip side, we're like, now you don't have to wear that.
Yeah.
It's okay. You're still safe.
Yeah.
So then it's got to be confusing for those little guys.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed meeting Kelly. If you want to hear more episodes from powerful women like her, check out my new website, www.pinkpluspodcast.com, where you can find all the episodes, learn about the guests, leave reviews, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Instagram @PinkPlusPodcast for updates. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and we'll catch you next time.